The 2023-2024 schedule is a doozy with a huge homestand in March and a lot of road games in April. We will break it all down on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning in, make sure you take the time to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new content throughout the week. If you are an everydayer who tunes in each and every day of the week, we are glad you're back as we continue to take you through Locked on Wild Boot Camp. Today's episode of Locked on Wild brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, Zach Zeman joins us as we dive into the 2023-2024 schedule. Lots of quirks, lots of odd splits between home and road, and a big homestand and a big road trip at the end of the season. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. As mentioned, making his triumphant return to the Locked on Wild airwaves, Zach Zeman is back. And Zach, we were diving in a little bit to the 2023-2024 schedule as part of Locked on Wild Boot Camp. It is interesting, to say the least. There are a lot of quirks with this year's schedule that we haven't seen in years past.
Yeah, I mean, it surely doesn't feel like it in Minnesota right now, but October is around the corner. It's been so hot here the last couple of days, but I'm starting to get a good sense of hockey is around the corner. And we've been diving into the schedule before we started recording. There's a lot to dissect here. I'm really excited. There's a lot of events happening in Minnesota. You got the Frozen Four this year, which prompts a Wild away stand. We're going to go talk about all that. Pretty hectic schedule, but nothing the Wild can't handle.
Yeah, they can certainly contend with this. It's not the first time they have been handed some lengthy trips either way at the end of the season. And we've got, of course, the Global Series. So we're just going to go to start month by month, and we'll pick out some of the top games, some of the most intriguing games for the Wilds over that span. We'll start with October. Season starts on the 12th. That will be hosting the Florida Panthers. The Wild then go at Toronto on the 14th, at Montreal on the 17th. They host Los Angeles on the 19th, Columbus on the 21st, Edmonton on the 24th, then at Philadelphia on the 26th, at Washington on the 27th, at New Jersey on the 29th. So, Zach, looking at that first portion of the schedule, the month of October, what are the couple of games that stand out to you as the most intriguing as we get the season started?
Yeah, you got some dogs, man. You got some really good hockey teams coming right at you. Obviously, Florida went to the Cup Finals this year. We're hosting them, our very first game. But I would be ashamed to not mention Toronto, the second game of the year. Obviously, if you don't have a solid lineup starting right away, you're probably going to get some mismatches with Toronto's powerful team. The roster is going to get challenged right away. There's going to be a lot of coaching decisions, especially with these two contenders in the first couple games. I mean, Florida, great. Obviously, they went to the Cup final. They still have to prove themselves a little bit. And Toronto's hungry. I mean, they've made a lot of changes and they've restructured a lot. I'm really excited to see how they're going to be. It's the Wild's first away game in a great city full of fans. It's going to be a tough test, and I think it's a great way to kick off the season. If there's something wrong with the lineup, you're going to want it to get tested right away, and I think it's a good opening.
Yeah, I agree. We're hoping to avoid the 0-3 start that happened last year, but the one that I think is most intriguing to me is the Los Angeles Kings. Obviously, you got the Kevin Fiala factor there, but we also now have the Cam Talbot factor as Talbot signed with the Kings in the offseason. Goalie situation, really not resolved that much. So there's a good chance that we end up seeing Talbot in net for the Kings, and that's going to be interesting. That's going to be maybe a little spicy for how things went down as Talbot left. So that is definitely one that I am circling on the calendar. And then, of course, the New Jersey Devils. Two of the best games of the season last year against New Jersey. Both came down to the wire. In fact, the overtime winner for Matt Boldy as time expired was probably the highlight of the season. So you always circle the Devils as the calendar gets going. And so for the first month of the season, I think the breakdown is 5 road, 4 home. It's going to be a test for the Wilds, and they're going to have to be on their A game if they want to navigate through to the month of November, which sees this: home against New Jersey on the 2nd. So you go at New Jersey, and then your next game is home against New Jersey. And Zach, there's 6 instances in which the Wilds play teams either back-to-back or twice in a 3-game span. And it doesn't seem like that has been something that they have done as frequently over the last few years, but now it's everywhere this year.
Yeah, at a quick glance of this year's schedule, it's good that you're not hopping from the West Coast to the East Coast on obviously the whole scheduling department of the NHL, whatever they do, they don't make you travel so far, which is a good thing. I've noticed you do play, let's say, for instance, we just talked about you're in New Jersey, you host New Jersey like 3 days later. We see a couple of those throughout this year, which is kind of nice. I mean, it prompts storylines, I think. If you have a terrible game in New Jersey, then you can try to redeem yourself, make those necessary changes, and attack them at home. So you kind of get redemption. I feel like that's a really good thing for, the NHL, both like marketing wise and fan energy wise. I feel like it'll just be, hey, we just played these guys. If you noted, like for fans' sake, if you note, like, let's say, like, I don't know, Kaprizov went unreal in New Jersey. Let's see if he can continue that. It's always good to, as a fan, you get to kind of just follow those storylines, especially if you face the same roster twice. But in November here you go back to the East. You go New York Islanders, New York Rangers, and Buffalo. I mean, those are some dogs. Like, you really just can't dismiss it. And obviously those road trips are going to be some fun games to watch, but also some grueling flights, some grueling nights. And I'm excited for it.
Yeah, that start to November is just that is a meat grinder. You've got the Devils at home, the Rangers at home, then you're at the Islanders, at the Rangers, at the Sabres. And that Rangers Sabres is a road back-to-back. So that gets dicey. And after that, you host Dallas, you host Colorado, at Detroit on the 26th. We should also mention there is a gap between Dallas and Colorado because the Wild will be heading off to the Global Series in Sweden to take on both the Senators and Toronto as well. So the Wild going to get some international travel in as well to start the season.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The Wild are one of these teams that has a lot of Swedes on their roster. And speaking of Swedes, Gustafsson. Yeah, Sweden. So we always get to go watch those cool games. It's good for the Wild to get a push. I feel like we never see those national games. And I feel like, it's just you can't bring the Wild, or you can't keep the Wild in the United States during this time. A lot of Swedish players. And Gustafsson obviously signed that new contract. Pretty sweet to see. He's had a great year ahead of him. He's only started 60 games or something like that. And I think if he gets to prove himself earlier in this year, it's going to be a great series. He's in his home country, home fans. You got all these people who love hockey out there, and I think to play in front of them for our players and for like all these, man, it's just going to be amazing for the Wild to show up. And I know the Wild have a lot of international fans. I'm just excited to see all that stuff, and all the Swedes get to play at home for a couple. I feel like the energy is going to be there for this team. They got a lot to prove. A lot of Swedes. Why not go out there and have a couple good games?
Oh, yeah. And Locked On Wild might end up doing something a little special for those two Sweden games, because you got a 9 a.m. puck drop for the Saturday game, and then you got a 7 a.m. puck drop for the Sunday game. we might have a little reason for you to get up and get your coffee in your system. So stay tuned. I don't want to spoil too much.
You got Mizzou football to watch, and then you got the Vikings to watch. It's going to be a couple of long days. Make sure you tune into both. If you're a Minnesota sports fan on that Sunday, man, you can't go wrong there. That's going to be a fun little weekend, and I'm excited to watch it myself and excited to see how it goes down.
Yeah, we'll keep tabs. We'll keep you in tune as to what is to come for those Global Series games. We're going to take a look at our favorite games in November, and we'll continue to cruise through the schedule as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. And if you took the under on trades for the Minnesota Twins at the trade deadline, you made a lot of money with FanDuel. So make sure that you do all of that and more on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will continue to take you through Locked On Wild Boot Camp as we're going to look at players who could break out here in 2023, 2024 for today's special bonus episode coming up later today. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any new content as we roll through the offseason. Seth Topal joined by Zach Zeman. And Zach, I've got a compromise for you here for the month of November. How about we just call that entire East Coast meat grinder the games of the month of November with that entire stretch? I mean, you do play Dallas and Colorado. They play Detroit, then St. Louis and Nashville. But that first stretch of games, that first stretch of 5 games to start the month, that's the one to watch for this team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got these great Eastern teams. I mean, Buffalo gave the Wild a lot of stuff last year, which was hard to see. And, you know, there's a lot of struggles that happened last year on the East Coast. And I think, you know, seeing all this stuff, you got 5 great games out of the early in November. I mean, can't go wrong. That road trip, it's going to be tough. Like I said earlier, it's just, you got to really prove it. You got a good off day after New York Islanders there to head over to however far away it is in New York to face the Rangers, Madison Square Garden. So, I mean, some great games. I feel like it's a good road trip if you want to go out there in New York, couple fans and stuff. I think it'd be fun. I always like to look at these schedules and think of, if I was, you know, like if I could go to every game, like what are the good road trips I'd go on? I think New York and Buffalo would be some solid ones. And yes, I don't know. That's just me. I've never been up there. So, I mean, I feel like that'd be fun for some fans.
Put it on the bucket list.
Always.
After that, we move to December. The Wild play Chicago on December 3rd. They host Chicago, so a chance to see Connor Bedard in person. And after that, then we have one of the most aesthetically pleasing parts of the schedule. It's a sandwich. It's a Calgary-Vancouver sandwich with Edmonton and Seattle in the middle. You go at Calgary, at Vancouver, at Edmonton, at Seattle, and then you host Calgary and Vancouver for a nice little six-game slice to start off the month of December. And so we're seeing a theme here, Zach, is that they're putting a lot of these road trips together. And so now you go from the East Coast to the northern portion of the West Coast / Canada. And you're just trying to put all those games in one spot and kind of neatly pack them together. And we get it again here.
Yeah, I feel like when we were doing this last year, you know, with the Wild's goaltending, you know, we always think Gustafsson gets this one, Fleury gets this one. But this year, I feel like Gustafsson gets those good games where it's like they're not back to back a lot of the time. So what I'm seeing in early December is you're in Calgary, you get a day off, and you're back in Vancouver. And I think with that Gustafsson contract, you got to give him games to play. And I think he's going to have to take a heavier load on some of these road trips. And it's going to be more consistent for his game. So I'm expecting to see Gustafsson really get the heavier games and the ones that mean the most. And if not, then Fleury can take care of the rest, I think. But you just got to give Gustafsson what he wanted and what he deserved. Obviously, he went to arbitration for a reason. He wants to get paid. He wants to play. And so I think you got to give him those games. And I think that this schedule, especially here in early December, it's not too grueling. You don't have so many close back-to-back games, and you're staying in the same time zone rather, and you get to make those adjustments if you need them. And I think I would like to see Gustafsson get some net time.
Yes. Oh, he will for sure. I don't think there's any way, or there shouldn't be at least, that he doesn't get like a 50-30 split. He's got to be the lead dog for this team this season.
Absolutely.
Moving through now the middle portion of December, on the 18th, the Wild are at Pittsburgh. So they host Calgary and Vancouver, then head back east, at Pittsburgh, at Boston, back-to-back on the 18th and 19th, then home against Montreal on the 21st. December 23rd, the Boston Bruins come to town, then the Wild off for Christmas. They'll resume play on the 27th against Detroit, and they finish 2023 with a home against the Winnipeg Jets on the 30th and the 31st, at Winnipeg, and then home against Winnipeg. So all things considered, Zach, the early portion of December with that West Coast swing, what are your favorite games here for the month of December?
I'm a big fan of the home and homes, especially against the Wild's rival, Winnipeg Jets. I mean, these are two games, I feel like they always happen around this time too, where it's like, how bad do you want to end 2023? Do you want to end it on a good note, or do you want to end it on not a good note? Because the Winnipeg Jets are a beatable Central team, but they always bring the fire whenever they play us. And that's just how it is. That's always what it's going to be, and that's always going to be the rival. And those are two tough games. I mean, and they're both day games. Have you seen that? They're both 2-1. It's going to be kind of an interesting little home and home. You got the weekend home and home. Not a lot of things you see too often. And I think it's going to be a good time. You got to get to watch that game right before the ball drops. I think the Vikings also play the Packers that day. It's going to be another good day of sports. And so, man, it's going to be exciting. And I think the Wild really have the upper hand against Winnipeg this year. And to end 2023 on a back-to-back win against Winnipeg, can't go wrong there.
That'd be elite. You're starting to get me fired up now mentioning these Vikings games thrown in. Because we get to the point where we're just going to be able to sit in front of the TV and just cycle through. You go from one to the next. You got the Wolves, you got the Wild, you got the Vikings. The Twins will have been done for a long time by that point, but you got three teams that you can just cycle through. You've got college football, you've got the NFL.
Yeah, man,
it's paradise. That
is a great time to be alive.
Yes, paradise is returning. We're returning from the sports abyss. It's not going to be long. Let's just move through the month of January here to close out. Then we'll finish, of course, with February, March, and April. January looks like this for the Wild. They resume the schedule on January 2nd, hosting the Calgary Flames. They then, on the 4th, host the Tampa Bay Lightning. Saturday at Columbus on the 6th. Then a home and home against Dallas on the 8th and the 10th. They host Philadelphia on the 12th, host Arizona on the 13th, host the Islanders on the 15th, and then our favorite Florida swing at Tampa Bay, at Florida. That's a back-to-back as well. And then at Carolina on the 21st, home against Washington on the 23rd, home against Nashville on the 25th, home against Anaheim on the 27th to finish off the month. So some interesting things here, Zach. In January, the home and home against Dallas, the Florida swing with Carolina added in. Which one are you looking at and circling the hardest for January?
I think if you're a Wild fan and you're marking down the calendar of January here, you can't go wrong in circling the two Dallas games. Now, the Wild host Dallas earlier in the year, but the last time they hosted Dallas, had a game off, and then went to Dallas was the playoffs. And let's not forget, I was the only one who was right in the playoff podcast, and I said Dallas would beat us. No, I'm kidding. But hey, this is just going to spark that playoff energy again. I mean, you can't go. I mean, if you host a team, you go off a day, and then you go back to where you came from. It's against Dallas again. It's just going to spark that. It's going to feel like a little mini series. And I think it's good against Dallas. I mean, obviously that is not over. The Wild are just they're hanging on to that series. It's going to be a couple good proving games. Obviously, Central Division teams. I'm always looking into the Central Division matchups, especially in these later months when the playoff push, is definitely in your headlights. And I think that these two Dallas games are going to be huge, and they're going to be contending. And I think the Wild really can make a couple statements there with those wins.
Yes, I like it. That Florida gauntlet is going to be dicey too, but you lead with you put your best foot forward with Gustafsson to start it off, and then you ride Fleury on the back end. We'll see. The Wild break there for the All-Star break, and so they are going to have something cooking to just unwind and reset, and then it is all about the push the rest of the way. And so we will look at the remainder of the gauntlet that is the 2023-2024 schedule as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, make sure that you continue to stick with us through Locked On Wild Boot Camp. We have player expectations coming, as well as a look at how the Wild rank amongst the rest of the Central Division and the Western Conference in key areas. And we will look at players who could potentially break out this season as well. We got it all coming up for you over the next 2 months. Let's make sure that you subscribe on Locked On Wild. Final push of the season. We've got February, which sees the Wilds start after the All-Star break at Chicago on the 7th. Then host Pittsburgh on the 9th, then at Vegas and at Arizona on the 12th and the 14th. Back home against the Buffalo Sabres on the 17th, home against Vancouver on the 19th, then at Winnipeg, at Edmonton, at Seattle. That Edmonton-Seattle is a back-to-back on the 23rd and the 24th, then home against Carolina and at Nashville to finish off the month of February. Zach, which games are you circling for the month of February?
I think the back-to-back in Edmonton and Seattle are the two biggest games, regardless of hosting Buffalo. I mean, going to Vegas, obviously a tough game there. I think the back-to-back is where it becomes pretty dicey. And I think Edmonton's a solid team. Seattle obviously went to the playoffs. Both playoff teams. I just think you really got to have a good goalie there. I mean, I always go to the goalies. I'm such a big fan of who they choose in these games. Obviously Fleury's going to get some games. It's just like, which ones are they going to do? It always comes down to that for me. I feel like if you have Fleury leading out one of those games, it's going to be nice because you got Carolina at home there. Always a solid team of Carolina coming into town. Nothing you can just push over. It's a definitely tough end of February there.
And I know I'm not a huge fan of like weeknight late games, but that Edmonton Seattle is a Friday night and a Saturday night. You got no work plans, pop a beverage, just sit in front of the TV, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock starts.
Yeah.
Let's get fired up. I like that. And that again sets up for another fun weekend. I mean, the NFL will be done by then, sadly, but another fun weekend of sports watching as the Wild take on those two teams. So should be interesting. Now we move to March, and this is where things get interesting. The Wild start the month of March at St. Louis on the 2nd. Then they fly to San Jose on the 3rd. Then it's at Arizona, at Colorado. So back-to-backs to start off the month of March. Then home against Nashville, home against Arizona, home against Anaheim. And then it's at St. Louis, at Anaheim, at the Los Angeles Kings. Anaheim and the Kings are a back-to-back as well. home against St. Louis on the 23rd, home against San Jose on the 28th, and home against Vegas on the 30th. And that starts the longest homestand of the season that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But Zach, a lot of back-to-backs here in March, which is not something I'm super thrilled about.
Yeah, no, obviously not. A couple of way back-to-backs too. You got Arizona and Colorado, and then you got Anaheim and the Kings. Obviously they're in California, which is not that bad. But it's still something to note. And I think that, you got to take advantage of those 3 home games. You got Nashville, Arizona, and Anaheim. You really got to hit those ones home. This is playoffs are around the corner at this time. The standings are starting to get way more important than they were in October. And so these are all must-win games at this point. I see 3 games against St. Louis here, another Central Division team that's kind of been a little off the radar. In St. Louis, then you host St. Louis, all on Saturdays. Those are must-win games, and I think you just got to really circle these Central Division opponents. There's a ton of them in this month. 2 Arizona, 1 Colorado, 3 St. Louis, and you just got to really hammer those home. In time for the playoffs to start.
Month of April continues the homestand, which all told is a 6-game homestand from the 23rd to the 6th of April. And so it starts with, it continues, I should say, with Ottawa on the 2nd, Colorado on the 4th, and then Winnipeg on the 6th. And then sit down for this, at Chicago on the 7th, at Colorado on the 9th, at Vegas on the 12th, at San Jose on the 13th, at Los Angeles on the 15th, and then home to finish off the regular season against Seattle on the 18th. So this is due to the Frozen Four being at the XL Energy Center, but that's not what you're hoping for to finish off the season. Is basically the entire last month of the season on the road.
Obviously, I think the Wild have to accept that when the Frozen Four came on, knocking on their door, say, hey, you want to host Frozen Four and go on an away stand? I think the Wild said yes to that. But, hey, last year I feel like the Wild kind of let off the gas heading into the playoffs, something that was not seen 2 years ago when they were pushing for a home ice against St. Louis. And so, that trend of last year is, what are they going to do this year? Are they going to really keep on the gas pedal? Are they going to sit Kaprizov, sit the top liners? What's going to happen? Those games, obviously we'll break those down when the day comes closer. But just at a quick glance right now, it's obviously a tough road week. I mean, Chicago, Bedard, you never know what they're going to do, man. I feel like Chicago is just always there when you don't want them to be. In that weird spot of the schedule, even if they're contending or not, they're always just going to push something. It's always a great game against Chicago. And then you're in Colorado, all the small things. Okay, yeah, you get that going in there. And then you go to Vegas and San Jose, 2 teams that you do not want to play back-to-back, especially because San Jose is so unpredictable. And I feel like they always are just there as a game that just doesn't need to be a back-to-back. I definitely am really intrigued in that game for some weird reason. 3 games left of the season. Are the Wild probably? I'm just assuming they're definitely going to still be in contention with all these other teams. The Central is always so jumbly at that time that I feel like these games are just going to matter, even if they're not the best, well-rounded NHL teams that you're seeing. But hey, it's going to be interesting, and I'm going to grab my popcorn, and I'm just going to sit back and relax and watch that. And hopefully the Wild keep the foot on the pedal here, because I feel like home ice is more valuable than they thought it was last year.
Yeah, and I'll say this right now. If this team is in contention for a postseason spot, you better hope you're not trying to play catch up by the time the month of April comes around, because
exactly.
We'll break down month by month as we go. We wanted to give you the schedule at large, but Zach and I will break down on a month-by-month basis with predictions on how things are going to go. We just wanted to hit you with it for boot camp to give you that at-large look. So make sure you stay tuned for that as the season unfolds here, starting up in October. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, so you don't miss out on any of our new content throughout the course of the week. We have new episodes every Monday through Friday. as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.